All right, Marcus, I don't know if you can hear me, but looks like we've got some people in the waiting room, and when you're ready, I can let them in.
Okay, yeah, whenever you guys are ready, is there gonna be like an introduction or do I just start?
Yes, I'll give you an introduction.
Okay, all right.
All right, cool. All right, I will start the recording. Okay, welcome everyone. Um, so glad that you're here on this Friday afternoon. This is the Black and Neuro Seminar Series, where we highlight outstanding scholars in the field of neuroscience. Um, and it is my joy to introduce Dr. Marcus Johnson. Dr. Marcus A. Johnson is an assistant professor in the Department of Health, Kinesiology, and Sports Studies at Texas Southern University. His research focuses on community-based behavioral interventions to promote physical activity, cognitive health, and health equity among underserved populations, with a particular emphasis on resistance training engagement in older adults. Dr. Johnson has completed advanced research training through NIH-supported programs, including the Pride Behavioral Medicine and Sleep Disorders programs, and the NIMHD RCMI Team RCMI Mentorship Program, and the Research Career Institute in the Mental Health of Aging. His work integrates behavioral science, culturally responsive intervention design, and community engagement strategies to address disparities in health outcomes. Dr. Johnson's current research aims to develop scalable interventions that improve resistance training participation and support healthy aging in high-risk communities. Um, and before we finally get started with his talk, I just wanted to say that automatic closed captioning is enabled in this call. You can choose to view or hide closed captions by clicking the live transcript or show captions button. If you have issues accessing these captions, please message me in the chat. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Marcus Johnson.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, I guess kind of depending on where you're at. Thank you for this opportunity to be here. Again, my name is Dr. Marcus Johnson. I'm an assistant professor of kinesiology at Texas Southern University. And today I'll be talking about reimagining brain health interventions, a community-based approach to cognitive vitality in Black men. I don't plan on keeping too much of your time. My youngest daughter has field day today, and she's expecting to see me there. So we'll try to get through this. Um, First, I'll say that I'm not a neurologist or neuroscientist, but my work sits at the intersection of neuroscience, behavior, and community-based health. And I'm excited to share how we can better translate what we know about brain health into real-world impact. When I use the term cognitive vitality, I'm referring to staying mentally sharp, independent, engaged, and cognitively functional as we age. This work is especially important because while advances in neuroscience continue to expand our understanding of cognitive health, those advances are not always reaching the populations who need them the most. My goal is to bridge that gap by not only understanding the science of brain health, but designing approaches that are accessible, culturally relevant, and grounded in the lived experiences of the communities that we serve. So I want to start with a simple idea. We know how to slow cognitive decline. Research suggests that cognitive decline may be slowed through a combination of lifestyle and behavioral factors. These include getting regular sleep, getting adequate sleep, regular physical activity, cognitive stimulation, social engagement, stress management, cardiovascular health management, and a healthy nutrition. Collectively, these factors help support brain structure, vascular health, neural communication, and cognitive resilience across aging. However, much of the public conversation around exercise and brain health has historically focused on aerobic activity, while resistance training has kind of taken the back seat. But more recent evidence is beginning to show that resistance training may play a particular important role in supporting cognitive vitality because of its combined effects on neuroplasticity, vascular function, inflammation, and neurotropic signaling. So, for example, a 2025 systematic review of meta-analysis by Wu and colleagues found that resistance training significantly improves overall cognitive function, working memory, verbal learning, and memory performance in older adults. And we'll kind of get into the mechanics of that later on. Similarly, Zhang and colleagues in 2025 reported that resistance exercise interventions were associated with improvements in executive function, memory function, and global cognition in older adults, both with and without cognitive impairment. But not everyone has access to those solutions that I spoke of earlier. And that gap between knowledge and access is where many of the disparities we see today begin. So the question becomes, how do we move from knowing to actually reaching the people? Problem. So according to the Alzheimer's Association's 2024 Alzheimer's Disease Facts and Figures report, older Black Americans are about twice as likely as older white Americans to have Alzheimer's disease and other dementia. In a large 14-year cohort study published in 2016, they found that dementia incidence was highest among African Americans compared with several other racial and ethnic groups. So together, these findings show why cognitive health equity must be central to brain health intervention work. At the same time, Black men remain underrepresented in both the research and intervention efforts, due in part to longstanding structural inequities, limited access to culturally responsive healthcare, and historical mistrust of medical and research institutions. That mistrust has been shaped by unethical practices, such as the U.S. Public Health Service study at Tuskegee, commonly known as the Tuskegee Syphilis Study, in which Black men with syphilis were deliberately left untreated for decades without informed consent. The legacies of studies like Tuskegee continue to influence perceptions of trust, participation, and engagement in health research today. And so you may be asking, so why choose Black men or older Black men? Well, I guess first and foremost, because I'm a Black man. So I kind of feel like I have an inside track on that. But of course, I have older Black men in my family, my father, uncle, things of that nature. So it's just kind of important to me. I feel close to it. I feel like I have that connection to it. So it's not necessarily, I feel like they need to have special attention. That's just, I feel like that's my lane. So that's why I chose Black men. But when interventions do exist, they are often clinically based, individually focused, and not designed with cultural or community context in mind. So we're not just dealing with a biological issue, we are dealing with an engagement issue. And this speaking about Black men being underrepresented, I think it also kind of comes down when I get into the study that I did later, and I was looking to recruit older Black men. My initial goal was just to get 30 older Black men, 15 who did do resistance training, 15 who did not. And I figured, I was like, hey, I'm going to get this in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks max. And so I actually ended up getting more than 30. I got 37, but it took me about 2 months because I simply couldn't get Black men to participate in it. For example, there was a recreation center that I went to, and the majority of the patrons were African American. And I went up there and I was like, hey, can I put this flyer out for this survey for Black men to take? They just have to scan the QR code and they can do it on their phone. And they were like, sure, you can do that. But you'll probably need to bring actual paper surveys up here in order for them to fill it out because technology just, it isn't their thing. So I was like, okay, I can do that. So I go and I make copies of the survey, I take them back up there. I was like, I'll be back in like a week to come collect some of the surveys. And they're like, okay. So it was exactly a week. I get back up there in a week and I talked to the guy and I was like, hey, I'm back for the surveys. And he was like, we haven't had any fill them out yet. And he was like, yeah, they looked at them, but they haven't filled them out yet. And and I just think there's still that, perception of putting your information out there and, letting somebody, hold on to it. I think that's one of that's some of the things that I've noticed with older Black men is that they don't want to put their information out there, that they'll be susceptible to certain things. So that's another challenge in trying to get Black men into research such as this. All right, so what's missing? This requires us to rethink how we approach brain health. We have to shift from individual behavior to community context because health behaviors are heavily influenced by social support, culture, environment, access, and trust, not simply personal choice alone. Um, the best example I can give is when the COVID-19 vaccine came out, and I just remember kind of talking with some of my friends and some of my buddies, and they're like, "Oh no, I'm not gonna do it. I'm gonna end up growing the horns and stuff like that." And so it wasn't until I actually got the vaccine, and nothing. I'm not saying nothing. There were no negative side effects for other people, but for me, there were no negative side effects or anything like that, and that kind of helped to change their mind on getting the COVID-19 vaccine. So I do think it's a group support type thing when it comes to research and uh, health behaviors and things of that nature. We also have to shift from clinical settings to real world environments because many individuals may never consistently engage with traditional healthcare or research spaces, but they do engage with trusted community spaces such as churches, recreation centers, and local organizations. Finally, we have to move from awareness to actual engagement. Simply knowing that something is healthy does not automatically lead to behavior change. People are more likely to participate when interventions are practical, accessible, culturally meaningful, and realistically fit into their daily lives. Just a quote here: positive health behaviors are more likely to be initiated and sustained when people have supportive environments, cultural relevance, and meaningful access. Why resistance training? So here's where we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of it. So, like I said earlier, one area that is often overlooked in brain health conversations is resistance training. When I say resistance training, lifting weights, things of that nature. So not necessarily like, running miles or running laps, but actually going to the gym, going to the weight room, lifting weights. But we're seeing growing evidence that it's linked to improvements in executive function, emotional regulation, and neuroplasticity. To briefly define those, executive function refers to higher level cognitive processes like decision making, attention, and self control. Emotional regulation is our ability to manage stress, mood, and emotional responses. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is BDNF. Is often described as a growth factor for the brain. It supports neuron survival, synaptic plasticity, and learning. Higher levels of BDNF are associated with better memory and cognitive function. So, what does that BDNF have to do with resistance training? Resistance training creates metabolic and mechanical stresses in the body, which triggers the release of signaling molecules. These signals travel to the brain and stimulate the production of BDNF. BDNF then supports synaptic plasticity, meaning it helps neurons communicate more efficiently and to adapt over time, especially in areas like the hippocampus, which is critical for learning and memory. The next thing I want to talk about is IGF-1, or insulin-like growth factor 1. IGF-1 plays a role in neurogenesis, which is the creation of new neurons, and helps support communication between brain cells. Resistance training has been shown to increase circulating IGF-1, which may contribute to cognitive benefits. When you lift weights, IGF-1 production increases in muscle tissues. From there, IGF-1 enters blood circulation and it can cross the blood-brain barrier. Once in the brain, it supports neurogenesis and neuron survival, and it also interacts with BDNF to enhance overall brain plasticity. So in a sense, the muscle is sending a growth signal to the brain. We also see effects of cerebral blood flow when we lift weights, meaning increased delivery of oxygen and nutrients to the brain. This supports overall brain function and may help protect against cognitive decline. So during resistance training, we see acute increases in blood pressure and vascular demand, which improves circulation. Over time, this leads to better vascular function and blood vessel health, allowing more efficient delivery of oxygen and nutrients to the brain. This improved blood flow supports cognitive performance and may help protect against decline. So when we look at all three of these together, BDNF, IGF-1, and cerebral blood flow, we see a coordinated response where the body and brain are actively communicating with each other. This makes resistance training more than just a physical activity. It is a brain-supporting neurobehavioral intervention that influences both biological processes and health behaviors. So this is a study that I did to try to better understand this. I conducted a mixed method study, which included 37 Black men between the ages of 47 and 79. My initial goal was to examine the perspectives of Black men 55 plus on resistance training and if they actually connected resistance training to cognitive health or cognitive vitality. This study had two goals or two aims. First, to understand perceptions around strength, brain health, and aging. So what did they already know? And then second, to use those findings to develop a culturally grounded intervention framework. So we give them the survey, see what they say, and then we take that information to develop a culturally grounded weightlifting or resistance training intervention. Excuse me. So a little bit about the survey. The survey was designed to examine the perspectives of Black men regarding resistance training and brain health using both quantitative and qualitative measures. Survey items assess demographics, health and lifestyle behaviors, resistance training participation, beliefs about cognitive health, perceived barriers and motivators. We looked at institutional trust, cultural and social influences. We looked at masculinity, aging perceptions, faith and spirituality, and attitudes toward mental health and cognitive decline. The survey also included open-ended and semi-structured interview questions to better understand the participants' lived experiences, perceptions of resistance training, and views on cognitive vitality and healthy aging. So this was not just about identifying problems, it's about building solutions. And I would also like to add that with this study, I was able to get an article published in the Gerontologist. The title of the article is Designing a Culturally Responsive Resistance Training Intervention to Support Cognitive Health in Older Black Men, Findings from a Mixed Method Study. So that was actually a pleasant surprise. I wasn't expecting that, but hey, here I am. All right, so some of the key findings from my study. The first thing was beliefs. So one of the strongest findings we saw that beliefs mattered. Although only 22% of the participants reported engaging in resistance training at least 2 times per week, many participants still expressed concern about cognitive aging and a desire to maintain mental sharpness. So majority of the participants did not engage in resistance training, but we also found that those who did, who were already currently participating in resistance training, they did make that connection between resistance training and cognitive health. And then those also maybe who weren't resistant training but knew about the connection, they indicated that they were more likely to start a resistance training program. Um, so we also found that men who viewed resistance training as beneficial for brain health were substantially more likely to participate in resistance training regularly. In fact, cognitive health beliefs collectively explained a large proportion of the differences we observed in resistance training participation across the sample. So, taking all these together, these findings suggest that the way individuals think about brain health may meaningfully influence whether they adopt health promoting behaviors like resistance training. So, in other words, belief drives behavior. And this will come back into play when I discuss when I talk about the intervention itself. So, another key finding from the study were barriers, what the men saw as barriers as to why they didn't resistance train. Um, these barriers included pain concerns, limited access, cost, and unclear messaging about brain health. So many of the participants expressed concern about joint pain, prior injuries, arthritis, and uncertainty about how to exercise safely as they got older. Others described limited access to gyms, transportation problems, affordable programs, or culturally relevant fitness spaces within their community. So they had to travel uh, farther to go somewhere where they actually wanted to work out or where they felt like they belonged when they worked out. Participants also discussed unclear messaging about brain health and resistance training. While many had heard that exercise was generally good for you, few reported receiving clear information that resistance training could specifically support memory, mental sharpness, emotional regulation, or healthy cognitive aging. So, as a result, resistance training was often viewed primarily as a tool for physical appearance or muscle building rather than as a strategy for supporting long term brain health and independence. So, what the most important thing here is that these aren't motivation issues, these are structural barriers. So, it's not that they weren't motivated, they just because of things that were in place. I guess the simple way to put it is, I guess they didn't know better. Um, and one of the things, as I was going through this part of the study, I was also reminded that so with older adults, especially with older Black men, since this was my study, I kind of thought about my brother, me and my brother and my dad. So I'm assuming just because of how we were raised, when my dad was in school, resistance training wasn't necessarily a big part of like athletics or the athletic program. Whereas with me and my brother, when we were in school, like we started lifting weights like in middle school. I guess middle school could be different in different places, but like sixth, seventh, and eighth grade and on up. So lifting weights was always a part of our athletics, and we played athletics all through school. So with that in mind, so once we graduated and got out of school, we still had some idea of resistance training, how to start it, and what to do. Whereas I think, those who are older early on when they were in school, they didn't necessarily have that education or that experience with resistance training. Therefore, it'd probably be a little bit harder for them to um, keep doing it or starting it later on in life. Um, and so the problem is not that people do not want to engage, it is that the system is not designed to support that engagement. So another key finding was motivators. So we looked at what motivated engagement for those who were already doing resistance training. And what stood out was that participants were not primary, they weren't necessarily motivated by abstract ideas like simply preventing cognitive decline. So that wasn't necessarily their top priority or why they were lifting weights. Instead, many talked about wanting to maintain independence. They wanted to stay active. They wanted to continue taking care of themselves and their families and remain mentally sharp as they aged. Several participants made statements such as, I want to be able to move around on my own as I age, and I don't want to depend on anybody if I can help it. Others connected resistance training to energy, mobility, and longevity, saying things like, if I can keep my strength up, I feel like I can handle whatever comes with aging. The participants also frequently described wanting to stay sharp mentally and maintain clarity and focus in daily life. So that was another reason why they were motivated to do resistance training. So how we frame brain health really matters. People appear to connect more strongly with messages centered on strength, independence, functionality, and quality of life rather than with disease-based messaging alone. So, in other words, we need to keep the messaging positive in a sense, and not necessarily doom and gloom. So now I'm again during the study, we took the information that they gave us and we came up with a strong mind, strong body intervention, or the SMSB model slash intervention. Um, so this intervention, and I just take the note that the intervention hasn't necessarily been applied yet. We're still kind of in the stages of refining it, but I'll get into that here in a second. So we haven't actually applied the intervention yet. The intervention was not created in isolation or based solely on generalized exercise recommendations. The structure of the program was directly informed by what participants told us through both the surveys and interview data. Men consistently emphasize wanting to maintain independence, remain mentally sharp, age well, and engage in programs that felt culturally relatable, supportive, and accessible. They also highlighted barriers such as pain concerns, uncertainty about how to exercise safely, limited access, and lack of clear messaging around brain health. So we took all that information and we used a community-centered and design thinking approach to build an intervention that reflected those lived experiences rather than simply imposing a one-size-fits-all fitness model and just hope that um, what's the word, that they adapt and adjust to that one-size-fits-all model. Just a quick note, design thinking is a human-centered problem-solving framework that focuses on building solutions around the actual needs, experiences, and perspectives of the people the intervention is intended to serve. Instead of researchers simply deciding what participants need, the approach emphasizes listening to participants first and allowing their lived experience to shape the design of the program. So in other words, we started by identifying the barriers that we talked about earlier, the motivations, the concerns, and the participants' goals that they described. We then used those findings to guide the structure of the intervention, including the exercise format, educational content, the group-based delivery style, pain-sensitive modifications, and the emphasis on independence, mental sharpness, and healthy aging. So rather than creating a generic resistance training program and hoping that participants would adapt to it, we adapted the intervention to better fit the cultural context, priorities, and real world experiences of older Black men. So to kind of actually describe what the intervention looks like, it's a 12-week community-based resistance training intervention, which includes 2 or 3 supervised resistance training sessions per week. So it could be based on the ability or the health of the participants. It could be a Tuesday, Thursday, or a Monday, Wednesday, Friday type deal. Includes progressive functional strength exercises. So they don't do the same thing every week. It progresses as they go through. Weekly body brain education sessions. So at some point during that week, we explain how resistance training helps with cognitive vitality, and we give them the nuts and bolts and the mechanics so they have that understanding of how resistance training can help out their mental and cognitive health. And then, of course, the big thing is that it's a group-based, culturally relevant delivery designed to promote accountability, support, and social connection. So during the intervention, they work out together as a group, lifting weights. And I know this may seem kind of foreign for some people, but as I think about whenever I played football and we lifted weights during the season, that's what we did. We lifted weights in groups. So, like the running backs lifted together, quarterbacks lifted together, defensive backs lifted together, and you were in groups and you took turns. And, just kind of think about it. It did make it a lot easier, or we were more motivated to do it like that instead of lifting weights in isolation. And so, and, I just remember because, with your teammates and your friends, you're not necessarily burdened with, oh man, I'm lifting weights, I'm tired, but you're talking about other things, you're laughing, you're joking around, but you all are so focused on lifting the weight. So um, I think this is probably the most important part or biggest part of the intervention. And then the intervention isn't necessarily, you don't necessarily lift weights at a gym. So it could be at a recreation center within the community. It could be at a park close to where the participants go and hang out. We could even, on down the line, we're going to look to how can you incorporate it, maybe at a barber shop, or, at a church. If a church has the necessary space, how could you do it at church? So again, they work out in a group, but it's at a community space that they're comfortable with, that they frequent, that they already go to. Let's see. So the intervention also incorporates pain-sensitive exercise modifications. So if they do have pain, they are overcoming from an injury, the necessary adjustments are made for them. Beginner-friendly instruction and discussion centered on cognitive vitality, emotional well-being, healthy aging, and maintaining independence. So that, again, that's the educational part of the intervention. And again, the goal is not simply to improve physical strength, but to support cognitive health, increase self-efficacy and confidence, and create a sense of community and brotherhood around healthy aging. So again, it's not in isolation, but they're doing it together. But importantly, the model is designed to be implemented in trusted and familiar spaces such as churches, recreation centers, and other community-based settings where participants may feel more comfortable, supported, and engaged. So again, that is the one of the biggest things about this intervention. All right, so key insights. What this means moving forward are that these barriers are not necessarily fixed, but they're modified. That they're modifiable. Our findings suggest that culture, community context, accessibility, and messaging all play important roles in shaping health behavior and engagement. More importantly, engagement appears to increase when interventions are culturally relevant, supportive, and implemented in environments that the participants trust and feel connected to. So the next step for us for the Strong Mind, Strong Body intervention is to continue refining the program based on participant feedback and community input while formally evaluating its feasibility, acceptability, and implementation potential in real world settings. So we're currently in the starting early stages of doing that at Texas Southern, uh, Houston area, Third Ward area. Um, I was awarded with the Texas Southern University Seed Grant, and we're working on doing a small pilot study with 20 participants for a month, two uh, resistance training sessions a week, just to simply get their feedback on what they feel about the intervention. Just kind of look to see if if they're consistent with the how the intervention is put together and things of that nature. So we're in the process of doing that currently. But then, kind of moving on, we are also interested in examining a range of behavioral outcomes, including resistance training adherence, exercise self efficacy, social support, and long term engagement in physical activity. In addition, future phases will explore mental and cognitive health outcomes such as emotional well being, perceived mental clarity, executive function, stress regulation, and overall vitality. And for this, we just applied for the TSU Center of Biomedical and Health Research pilot project program, which is a $50,000 grant. We're waiting to hear back from that, and so hopefully, if we get that, we'll be able to, move forward with after we after we refine the intervention, make sure it's as efficient as it can be, then move on to applying the intervention and looking at those incomes, those outcomes, but also look at we want to look at physical outcomes too to make sure that the resistance training that the program is actually doing what it's making, because you lift weights to increase muscle mass, and so we want to look at certain physical outcomes to make sure it's doing that. So like also look at like functional mobility, balance, stability. Um, does it help with fatigue and energy? Does it improve body composition? Does it help reduce pain? So after we refine the intervention, make sure it's efficient, and then we'll look at those outcomes. Um, Another important direction involves training community leaders, fitness professionals, and community-based organizations on how to safely and effectively implement culturally responsive versions of the intervention within churches, recreation centers, and other trusted community settings. So, of course, this intervention could look a lot different at a church than at a recreation center, because a recreation center may already have their own equipment, whereas at a church, you may have to purchase certain kinds of equipment that can be housed at the church. And then even on further down the line, we plan to continue integrating neurophysiological measures such as portable EEG to better understand how resistance training may influence neural activity associated with attention, emotional regulation, and cognitive functioning in community-based environments. And so, actually, quick story, this was the part that I wanted to jump right into. I just wanted to do, hey, we put them in on a resistance training program. We do these EEGs because I was at a conference and they were showing they had they had people there who were advertising these portable EEGs, and I was like, man, that would be great. So we would put the EEG on them before they did their workout, and we would look at the brain activity. We would have them work out and then do it again to see if the brain activity was any different. But of course, that I was told that was too ambitious at that point, and so but I still have it in there. I'm gonna fit it in there somehow as we get on down the line, and we can prove that this is a good way to go. And I believe this is my last slide. So ultimately, we're not just simply thinking about whether an intervention works. We're thinking about sustainability, scalability, community ownership, and how to create a long-term pathways and support healthy cognitive aging among older men. Looking ahead, our goal is to continue expanding this work into larger community-based studies that further examine how culturally responsive resistance training can support cognitive vitality, emotional well-being, and healthy aging among older Black men. Ultimately, we hope this work contributes to the development of a broader NIH-supported research program centered on brain health equity, community engagement, and sustainable interventions designed specifically for aging Black communities. And so I'll close with this. If we want to improve brain health, we have to move from beyond simply educating individuals. We must design interventions that are accessible, culturally relevant, and grounded in the communities we are trying to serve. That means creating programs that reflect people's lived experiences, acknowledge historical and structural barriers, incorporate culturally meaningful messaging, and, and that they're implemented in trusted environments where individuals feel supported, respected, and understood. It also means moving away from one size fits all approaches and recognizing that community context, identity, social connection, and trust all influence whether people engage in health promoting behaviors and sustain them over time. Because at the end of the day, if we want to improve brain health, we have to meet the people where they are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. That was incredible. Um, I'd like to open the floor for questions if anyone, oh, sorry, my camera's not on. I'd like to open the floor for questions if anyone has any. I will start off. I'm really interested in what you mentioned about the portable EEG. Um, what, I guess, how feasible is, I guess when I imagine EEG, I'm like all these wires. How will you adapt that for in an exercise context?
So, so like I mentioned, I was at a conference, and I guess it was a company, and they had these EEGs where they would actually have us come and sit down at the table. They just popped it on our head, and we sat there for a little while, and they kind of showed us some I guess readings of the brain activity. So I base it completely off of those portable ones that I saw at the conference. But just kind of in passing, when I spoke to other people about it, they kind of had the same concerns that you, like, what about all the wiring and things of that nature? Um, and then I was speaking to one guy, and that's what he did, was he read EEGs, and he's like, man, that's kind of tough. So um, so, and I'm not an EEG specialist. I just kind of saw that and thought it was neat. So I think as I get on down the line with this, being able to figure out a way how to make it feasible, how to make it um, efficient to do right now. Since I kind of set it on the back burner, I don't really know, but I'm just really basing it off the portable ones that the people showed us and had us using, because I felt like that. I felt like it was pretty good, or it was accessible. It was small. It wasn't that much of a hassle. So I strictly based it off the portable EEGs that I saw at the conference. I don't know if that answered your question or not,
Oh,
but
absolutely, absolutely. And I know that the technology is super advanced, and I've actually seen that. After I asked that, I was like, no, I've actually seen, I think, wireless or even
yeah.
like significantly reduced wired um EEG sets. So that's going to be fascinating. I'm very excited to hear more about that. It looks like we have one question in the chat, and that was, did any of the participants have conditions such as prior stroke, TBI, ADHD, depression, or anxiety before participating in the study?
So no, for this initial survey, we did so as far as like depression and so I think we did ask about like major events if they've ever had like heart attack or stroke, things of that nature, but we didn't get as specific as like um, depression and things of that nature. Um, so we did survey for some of those, just kind of like the major events like diabetes, heart disease, things of that nature. But when we do, as we move on down the line with the research, those are some of the questions. Like we do plan on getting a little bit more specific in those prior health questions to kind of help, monitor to see if any changes happen with those participants. But again, this part was really just to get the input, develop the intervention, and then now we're going to try to refine the intervention. So when we do get on down the line, the intervention isn't necessarily the problem. We kind of worked out the kinks, and we can focus on those different outcomes.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us today. I'm so excited
Mhm.
to hear about what you've done so far, and I'm excited to keep um, be aware of what you do in the future and keep
Mhm.
in touch. So if there's no other questions, I will end the seminar here. Be sure to follow
Oh,
us on. Oh, we have one question in the chat again. Okay, so what do you think was the strongest motivator for people engaging with resistance training?
mhm.
So the strongest motivator we found was physical health slash looking good. That was the biggest motivator that the guys who were participating in resistance training according to the information we got, looking good and feeling good was more of a motivator than um, the mental cognitive health, even though they knew that it because again, according to the survey, most of those who were already participating knew about the benefits. But yeah, the biggest motivator was feeling good and looking good. I actually think looking good was bigger than feeling good. So,
Oh, and it looks
Hi.
like, oh,
Oh, hi. Sorry, I just jumped in here. I just wanted to touch base with you. Thank you so much for giving this presentation on behalf of Black and Neuro. And thank you for those who stepped in to moderate and ask and help with the facilitating. I didn't know if you had an opportunity to share your career journey. I don't know if you touched on that at the beginning. If
uh,
not, I think that may be a little bit worthwhile for people to hear in this space. Because we, to be frank, we don't see a lot of black men in this space. We're starting to see more, so I think it's worthwhile to touch on that, if you would be so kind.
okay, yeah. So, when I was initially invited to do this and I was kind of putting this together, I was like, never in a million years that I think I would be considered, be associated with the word neuro and so or neurology and the brain and things of that nature. But yeah, so my journey is did I mean to get to this point? No, not necessarily. Of course my specialty is kinesiology, and it was really once I got to Texas Southern, we have this big push on doing research, and they were providing us with different resources as far as different programs and things to apply for, to to dive into research. Even whenever I was working on my doctorate degree, my plan wasn't to do research. I simply thought I was just going to be teaching. But given these opportunities at Texas Southern, I applied to a few of these programs. Of course, I got into the behavioral sleep medicine program, and then with once I got into that program, I met some amazing people who were part of the Black Men's Brain Health uh, program, and so they were like, Marcus, you should apply for this. And so of course I applied for that, and and it's been because getting into that program, the Black Men Brain Health program, has led me to this point because I never I did know that there were mental and cognitive health benefits to resistance training. I just didn't know it had a place in the research world,
Mhm.
or that they had programs that would even consider that idea. And so yeah, because of that program, because of my mentors both in Black Men's Brain Health and the Behavioral Sleep Medicine program, because like I said, I wanted to hop right into it. I wanted to do the weightlifting and the EEGs, and my mentor in the Black Men's Brain Health, Dr. Lauren Carter, she said, no, let's let's slow it down. Let's do a survey, get some information from the survey, and maybe you can put that information out and get a publication, and then we can move on from there. And so I actually listened to her, but never in a million years that I would think I would be at this point. And so it just kind of happened, but it's just really taking advantage of the different opportunities. But when you do get those opportunities, the people that you meet who've been doing it, listen to them, work with them, and all those things. And so, yeah, I just kind of got here by accident, but I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and that's okay. Sometimes our journeys take us in ways that we would never have expected. So thank you for sharing. And so maybe a little bit more about like your day to day, right? So like, do you teach students and do research? Like, how many hats are you wearing on a given day?
Oh yeah, so I do teach. Uh, I teach and I do research. So when I'm not teaching, I'm working on the research and the things of that nature. But again, at Texas Southern, with the research push, they want us to introduce our students to research as well. So now it's starting to cross over to each other where I'm doing research, but I'm also introducing it in my classes. I'm, putting it in my classes. I'm telling my students about it. I'm having them participate in it as well. And so, yeah, so that kind of made it a little bit easier. So I didn't necessarily have to, prepare stuff for teaching and prepare stuff for research, but now I can, put my research stuff in teaching as well. So yes, and I didn't even know, to kind of tell you how naive I was, when I first got into the behavioral sleep medicine program, which was the first big one I was in.
Hmm.
Everybody was talking about how, I don't teach, or they were complaining about teaching one class. And I was like, man, I teach 3 classes every semester. And so,
Hmm.
and again, I didn't know that, you know, that, some professors, are simply there for research. I just didn't know. I thought everybody was supposed to teach, and, research was on the side. And so,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, there's so many different paths that we could take. So there is another question in the chat. So Alicia asked, "How do you feel learning about brain health? Was it something that you always wanted to do, or did you find interest once you went to Texas Southern?"
So it actually happened before I got to Texas Southern. It actually happened during my during my dissertation phase. I just kind of realized, well, during my dissertation phase, and when I finally finished, I kind of realized, I felt off, and I couldn't figure out what it was, and so I started doing just research on not necessarily brain health, but on just like why I felt off, why I didn't feel right. And so I came across a neuroscience podcast, and they were talking about sleep, and I realized that my sleep um, wasn't what it used to be, wasn't what it should have been, and they connected it to, they looked at sleep from a neuroscience standpoint. And I was like, man, that does make sense. And so I continued to watch the podcast, and the podcast was based on on neuroscience. And so, even when I was younger, like in high school or early on in college, I never really thought about it. But yeah, it was kind of that point where I kind of got into it. But even at that point, I wasn't really interested in the research. I was just interested in, oh, this is based on my brain or how the brain works. This is what I should be doing to make myself feel better. And so now using that information and getting into these research programs, I kind of wish I would have got into it early on. But, when I was in high school and stuff, I was, acting up. I wasn't, paying attention in science class and things of that nature. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Oh, good. Thank you for sharing. So, podcast just kind of sparked something in you, and now here we are.
yeah, yeah.
Good, very good. So inspiration comes from all different places. So thank you. If there are no other questions, on behalf of Black and Neuro, the team that I work with who kind of supported this session here today, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and sharing the work that you're doing. Um, yes, if there and I just will wish everybody a wonderful Friday, a good weekend, and yes, thank you again.
Thank you. There's no better time than now to start lifting weights. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, thank y'all so much. Yeah. Lots of ham claps.